video, and today I'm going to be looking at the reason why scapular stability is so important, why I talk about it in so many videos, and also to help you I wanted to have a look at a visual of the scapula moving on a skeleton. So there's a lot of people, I get the question a lot, I can't actually feel what you're telling me I'm supposed to do, and they don't understand it because they can't really see what's going on because it's behind you and it's not easily visible on other people either. So yeah, so hopefully this video gives you a bit more of an idea of why it's so important and the role that it actually plays in so many things. So okay, so first reason why do I want to make this video, so I kind of alluded to it then. So examples be like when I've spoken about elbow problems, and I've made this reference to a quote of another therapist who've found this stuff to be the same, is that the scapula has a lot to do with the forearm and elbow pain because its position affects the arm's position within the shoulder socket, so which then in turn affects the forearm's position. So fixing the scapula is a big part of fixing the problem. Wing scapulas are, very pronounced. Not often do they, not always I should say, do they present with pain, but they do present with significant weakness, and attributed to a lot of neck pain and as amongst shoulder problems as well. Wall slides is an exercise I suggest for people to use a lot. A lot of people can't quite understand what it does. So hopefully in this video you'll get to see the reason why this exercise, even though it's so gentle and minimal, it doesn't look like it's really doing all that much, how useful it can be in retraining the motion that maybe has been lost for some reason. And here's just a picture of what the scapula looks like and where it sits, but we'll have a closer look at that in a minute. Alright, so with the shoulder itself, it's really like a balancing act between mobility and stability. When you look at when you see a skeleton, most of the joints will lock into each other, so the knees, even the hips to some degree will lock into things, elbows, even the humerus locking into this part of the shoulder. But the scapula itself is sort of like, and also the clavicle at the top there are the two that are different because they basically are sitting like in space vertically, so they're not really being locked into position as you would see with the knee and even the ankle and all these other joints. They're really just floating in space. So it means that they're very vulnerable to being exposed to problems, and the only way that they can get stability is via a massive supply of muscles, tendons and ligaments. All right, so it's useful because the way it's designed that way is so that it can give you a lot of positions, and the research has sort of shown that it's about 1,600 positions it can do. So as opposed to the knee, which is really limited in the positions and the angles and things that it can do. So unfortunately the dynamic mobility comes with a huge price. So meaning there's always this lack of stability because it can do all these amazing things. So that's why I say it's a constant balancing act between ensuring you have mobility but making sure there's stability to control it. All right, so whenever there's loss of that, then you're always going to end up in problems. So stability exercises, which are on my channel here, so obviously the wall slides I've used several times for all types of neck and shoulder problems. Some various other stability drills using bands that are sort of multi-directional, and obviously push-ups and other related things. So these are sort of more of the low-level type movements. This might be just protraction for serratus anterior and things like that. This probably focusing more on rotator cuff again, so serratus anterior, maybe lower trapezius, the other version of the wall slide. All right, so we'll have a look at those more in a minute, but firstly we'll look at some upward rotation, and this is one of the key concepts of the scapula that it does, and one thing that most people don't really understand because they can't really see it. So both the upward and downward rotation are crucial for the shoulder function, but I see more problems with the upward. I see, if anything, it's probably stuck in downward rotation most of the time, due to issues around the middle traps, the lower trapezius especially. Rhomboids are a real problem for the scapula. It's sort of, they become too dominating. But obviously at the front of the shoulder you've got pecs and lats that are creating problems too. So basically what this means, it refers to the rotation of the movements of the scapula around the thorax. So you can read through this later on if you want to, all the technical jargon, but basically it's there to assist the humerus in guiding the arm up overhead. So it's essential for actions like reaching up or performing a shoulder press in the gym. And you can see why a shoulder press can be a real problem if the scapula is not doing what it's supposed to do. All right, so this is a quick picture of what the muscles involved in this and the main muscles involved in what's providing this rotation. So serratus anterior pulling it, the lower trapezius pulling, and the upper trapezius all sort of providing this rotation. That would be your upward rotation, and when it's coming down it's more through your rhomboids and middle traps and so forth. All right, so let's have a look at that in action so you can see what it looks like. So let's have a quick look at that. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this video where we're going to look at how the scapula moves when you're lifting your arms out to the side and up over your head. And you can really clearly see here how much the scapula is involved in helping this motion to occur, and what would happen if it wasn't sitting closely on the thorax like you would see with a wing scapula, or a heavily depressed shoulder where it might be stuck and not able to assist in this humerus in guiding the arm up overhead. And you can clearly see how the ball of the humerus rotates around as the arms come up. So you'd have basically have your palms facing each other there, and then you can see how much the scapula is having to move into this downward rotation here, and then also how it must stay firmly attached to the rib cage, which would be the posterior tilt. Alright, so if there's problems with this moving or its positioning, it's going to severely inhibit what goes on here, and this is where all the issues through rotator cuff tears and impingements and all the various problems associated with the shoulder will happen up around here, with this playing a big role in what's going on and guiding all of these part of the shoulder into position. So let's have a look at another video that shows some other different movements of what's going on there. So, and we'll also look at the rotator cuff as well, so you can get a better idea of how that actually functions too. So we'll have a quick look at that. So here's our second video of the what's happening with the scapula with the various movements. So this first part was elevation and depression, and that would be protraction and retraction. So we'll see there's elevation where it's coming up and going down. And if I just pause here, this is really easy to see how closely the scapula is sitting on the rib cage here. So a winging scapula would see it actually sticking out throughout there and be basically forcing the head of the humerus forward in the socket there instead of sitting right in the center. So this part here is the protraction, what you would see with pushing movements like push-ups and presses, and the retraction is when you're doing rows. So there's your elevation, and your depression, so pulling the shoulders down. There's your protraction, and there's your retraction, and you can see clearly how the center of the humerus is sitting right in the center of the socket there. All right, so there's your retraction, and back to center again. All right, so really I'll just play that again so you can get to see all of these things going on. So there's your elevation, depression, now your protraction, retraction. All right, and every time it's coming back to the neutral, see how the scapula will sit nice and flat. All right, there's your depression. All right, there's neutral, there's protraction, retraction, back to neutral. See how the tip of the scapula sits down. There, elevation, depression again, and you see how the ball of the humerus there sitting right in the socket. All right, so everything just being guided through what the scapula is doing for the shoulder, and then this upper view, you see even more clearly how that has to sit on the rib cage, on the thorax. All right, so these are all great examples of what happens with the shoulder and why the scapula is so important. So let's have a look at the rotator cuff. So here's the rotator cuff, is that the teres minor, the infraspinatus, the supraspinatus, which is the one that's often injured, and then the fourth one being the subscapularis, which you'll see in a second, which is on the inner part. Here's the subscapularis here. So this one's the internal rotator. All the other three are all external rotators. All right, so they play a big part in centering the humerus within the shoulder joint itself. So these ones are often developing nasty trigger points, and you can see the direction they run is that it gives you clues as to how you try to release them when they do that. And the supraspinatus is the one that's often injured due to where its location and the tip of this acromion here sort of pinching on it all the time. This one can also get severely weakened as it's overpowered by the lats and the pecs that are also providing the internal rotation. All right, so you're really quite a unique set of muscles, but their real purpose, and this is the supraspinatus here, and you can see where it's injury because it's sitting on the top, and this is where all the pinching and rubbing and fraying of the tendon occurs. All right, but their main purpose is not necessarily to do external and internal rotation, but just to center the humerus within the socket when you're providing all the movements, like we saw earlier, where the scapula was heavily involved. All right, so this gives you, if you're not quite sure where they are and what they are doing, this gives you a visual of that. All right. Okay, so when there's problems with the scapula not moving, the potential for injuries are, like I mentioned before, elbow, shoulder impingement, neck pain, all types of different shoulder injuries too. So, the impingement's probably the most common, which is your rotator cuff tears, and that's where you'll get that pain when it's moving in this arc here. So that'll be from the supraspinatus getting pinched and rubbed. So that's where it's really difficult to do anything in this action, which was why you can't do pushing things, because you need your arm out in this position to be able to do them. Weirdly, you get no pain there because it misses it, but then it hits it again at the top here. All right, so it can be very, very painful. So let's have a look at what the rotator cuff does, and we'll come back and talk about that in a second as well. Okay, so that gives you a good example of what the rotator cuff looks like and where it's positioned. This picture sort of doesn't really do it justice, as you could see from the other one, where it doesn't even show you the subscapularis because it's on the inner part of it. But so basically each of the rotator cuff muscle moves the shoulder in a specific direction. They work together to ensure that it's centered in the joint throughout all the ranges of movement, as I described in the previous part. So their main focus is really to just centrate the head. So most people think of just doing external rotation and throwing things, but it's really involved in every motion of the shoulder itself. So just to make sure that it sits in the center and moves around it efficiently. But again, these problems could really be related to a scapular problem that's forcing these sort of trigger points in these, and especially infraspinatus and teres minor, especially if you've got this impingement, you're guaranteed to have trigger points there, and this supraspinatus is the one that's usually injured. All right, so it's sort of very tricky to try and get the control of everything that you need it to do. All right, so again, the scapula is the key. So this is the common way that most people try to strengthen the rotator cuff, which has a few problems with it when you overuse it. But basically, in order for it to work, it has to have the scapular retraction happening. All right, or else you'll develop weakness and muscle imbalances from something you were using to try and prevent one. All right, so to feel that yourself, you can do this by doing that exercise of external rotation, just by trying to move it, but then do your second part where you actually focus on the retraction of the scapula first and then move the shoulder, and you'll see that it's much smoother and the range is greater when you focus on the scapular retraction first. So what it tells you is the scapular retraining is really what was needed, not necessarily strengthening of the rotator cuff muscle with a rubber band like that. Alright, so now coming back to some of the other ways, so if we don't need to do that, how do I improve the strength of the scapula and the rotator cuff? Well, it depends on the person. Obviously, some of the easier things like the wall slides and rope protractions and various stability drills I might use first. But then I also want to try and develop strength with it so that it can, all the muscles cooperate together and do what they're supposed to. So a combination of pulling things and pushing things are ideal. So all your rowing things are great. With the pushing ones, because they're the ones that are most problematic, your overhead press, your cable pushers, all these single arm things give more freedom of the scapula to move around. The push-up, I can really focus on the serratus anterior and getting the protraction. It's really good as a test and assessment. I might also use some of these regressed movements where I'm trying to get upward rotation with as we call a monkey shrug, and various other exercises. They're all useful as well. But again, probably more on the wall slide sort of thing, where these are more functionally strengthening, more so than this one. So the key is to learn to move better. So I've just done a couple of quick videos of several of these movements to give you an idea of how things would move. So we'll have a quick look at those. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of these quick movements. I've looked at the wall slides in detail many times, so I won't go too detail into it, but just to follow up on what we were just looking at with the skeleton, so you can get a visual of how, if my arms are moving overhead, how my scapula is really meant to move to guide my arm up. So as it's going up here, my scapula's got to basically get this upward rotation to wrap around. Alright, so I'll keep going up, and then it should be helping me center the humerus right in the socket there. Alright, so I'll be in full upward rotation right now. Alright, and then as I'm coming down, and it's a downward rotation, so the scapula will be coming back in. Alright, so as it's going out, and that's why this is such a nice exercise, because I can really guide it into this position, and even if I make mistakes, I don't cause any harm. And you can see here, my right arm, a lot more compromised than my left one. See how this, I've had a bit of issue on this right arm in the last few days, but this one's a lot more efficiently moving there. With this one, I'm a little bit restricted to just kind of stuck in a little bit, or I can't quite get that last bit. Alright, so I've just got to work on this a little bit more over the next few days. Alright, so next, look at the next one. So this follows up. This would be more like the strengthening. This would be like your traditional shoulder press with more of a neutral grip. So this neutral grip, instead of a pronated grip, just allows me for a little bit more better positioning of my scapula, and I can get so if I just go back, I'm actually probably better on this than the wall slide. I think the load kind of helped me a bit here. So as I'm coming up, there's my upward rotation where it's coming right around. So alright, so the scapula's come around and the shoulder sitting in the socket, nice. Alright, but yeah, this just gives you that good visual of what we were just looking at a minute ago. Alright, and then so obviously the overhead things are always the hardest. So I hate the two arm movement. I prefer this one, and you can get a good idea of why. Which I've done this. You see how much more protraction I can get, more upward rotation. It's just a lot easier to get in that position. Apart from the fact I'm getting a bit of rotation, which actually helps me with my thoracic spine, it really does assist the scapula in guiding everything in the way that you want it to. Yeah, see how this, a lot easier, the same weight, just so much more effective. That's why I'll prefer this one than the two arm movements, especially if you've had a history of injury. All right, because I can add load, get strength with little risk. All right. Then the push-ups. We're going to have a look at the push-ups. So, like I was saying, that can be a really good, useful as a testing and an assessment type of thing. So you can get a real good visual of the person's ability to provide protraction. So Mel's getting the camera here. You can see how you can really clearly see there's the retraction where the scapulas come together, and then as I've pushed out, there's my protraction. There you go, and nice and flat at the top, so I don't have any winging of the scapula, so it's dead flat. So if the person's got that winging here, I know that there's no way that shoulder's stable enough in these pushing actions. So this is why this is such a good way to assess and test someone, but it's one of the few times the test is actually good as a corrective exercise in its own right. All right, so then we can move into like so the opposite of that is, if that was protraction, this is the retraction. So all your rowing movements. So I could use any type of rowing movement, dumbbell, barbell, cable, and these ones are always a lot easier because of the position of the arm being lower here. So all the pushing actions, I need my elbow up here, and that's that painful arc where we saw before with the impingements where the supraspinatus gets rubbed. That's why people have trouble with pushing movements. All right, so this is a great way to sort of see how that scapular retraction happening in that rowing. So it's doing the exact opposite of what we're doing with the push-up a minute ago. All right, very simple exercise, nothing fancy or tricky with this, but just to give you that idea of how to keep everything well balanced, so that the rotator cuff guides the humerus in the center all the time. You don't get any problems. You've got strength, you can do heavy things, and you don't blow things up. It does everything like it's supposed to. With the pushing action, very much like what we saw with the overhead, often with the horizontal one, the cable push is a better choice than the push-up, because I can again get that extra rotation, so I can get that further protraction. This is why this mimicking boxing, when boxing's known as for one of the best exercises for serratus anterior, which is one of the main ones providing the upward rotation. It's the one that's often the weakest. That's the whole reason for all the problems in the first place. And again, in these pushing movements is where the pecs are heavily involved, and they're going to start pulling that head of the shoulder forward into that internal rotation and out of the socket. So learning how to do the pushing actions where the pecs are cooperating with the serratus anterior so that they don't overpower it and do weird things and make the subscapularis weaker, because that's the only internal rotator of the shoulder, of the rotator cuff. So maybe you've got 3 external one and only 1 internal. So you easily see how imbalances can just evolve so fast, and you can end up in a lot of problems. All right, so I think it should give you some good ideas, a better understanding of how the shoulder actually functions after seeing the skeleton a second ago. All right. But really, that is the secret to getting it working well. You just may need to work on some mobility things in combination with them, because you may not be able to get in the position efficiently enough to be able to strengthen it the way that, or stabilize it the way that it's meant to. All right. So wall slides one here. Great exercise. And it's a great one that I'll often begin with to create that good motion that gets me to the overhead things that I'm looking for. All right, so in summary, the shoulder is unique in its ability to perform so many movements, yet because of that, it's very vulnerable to instability. The scapulas are the key to the shoulder, and also even elbow problems. You can't just use mobility things, you can't just use stability things, even though they probably will be the most effective early on, but you may be limited in your ability to position right. And the strengthening ones, if you choose the right ones, will sort of tie everything together, but you will still probably need to play with these a lot from time to time, especially if you've been injured before. Wall slides, push-ups, cable push are often the best exercises for the pushing side of things, and most of the rowing movements are great. Overhead pull-ups and chin-ups and lat pull-downs can be okay, but you in the early stages, more like these ones here are the main ones, with a few of the other assisting exercises in between. So if you have any questions, comments, put them in the description below. Make sure you check out this report here, which has all of my tests and programs, instructions of how to put all the various exercises I might use, which there might be I think from the last count, maybe 60 or 70 different exercises I might use depending on the person. You know, I don't need all of them, but I might have to play around with some to find the right one. So this sort of helps you to put all that together. So check the description below and you can get a copy of that. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed that video. It gives you a better idea of how the shoulder works.